Good evening. Would like to welcome everyone here this evening. We'll start first, what am I doing? Calling to order, perfect. And I'll go ahead. I haven't been here in so long, I forgot the procedures. But at this stage, I'd like to have everyone join me for the pledge. If you do have a cell phone, please turn it off so it doesn't goof up the taping. And I got that out of the way. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we can start with roll call, please, Mr. Wallace.
Wilkins.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Peterson. Bunce.
Here.
Gregg.
Here.
Bauman.
Here.
Fent.
Here.
Putvin.
Here. We have quite a few people. Excellent. Okay. For those people in our viewing audience, we did not have a December or January meeting. Tonight's meeting is special. We're all special. Okay. Having reviewed that, needs an approval here of this evening's agenda here for February 12th, 2018.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Who's the second? Okay.
Mr. Smith?
Gregg.
Yes. Here. Yes.
Smith.
Here
Yes.
and yes. See? He's been-
Bauman.
Yes.
Bunce.
Yes.
Fent.
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Putvin.
Yes. Next, I just need an approval of, again, our last meeting, which was November 27th, 2017, the meeting minutes. I did not see any errors.
I did not.
Somebody make the
Are you-
motion to approve?
I wasn't here.
Oh, I'll make the motion to approve.
I'll second, just because I read them too.
Okay. Bauman.
Yes.
Fent.
Yes.
Bunce.
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Gregg.
Yes.
Putvin.
Yes. Actually, I was going to start here with new business. I'll just read new business, but actually, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Mark, staff,
I'll take it.
whoever. Okay. Thank you. Floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you. By the way, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, these are all very special meetings. So-
Oh, I know.
Corrected him, you just didn't hear it.
Yes.
Based on who's here.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. So, first of all, we sincerely appreciate everybody here tonight for this one agenda item. This is a special meeting because it is outside of your normal regularly posted meeting schedule. That being said, per OMA, we did post it and advertise it appropriately. The Planning Commission may recall the rather laborious process that it went through not all that long ago in establishing some rather special language to create a whole new section of code that ultimately the City Council did ratify and approved by ordinance. That section of code is referred to as the Mixed-Use Planned Unit Development District, or MPUD. Printed out in front of your places this evening is a copy of that code. It actually comes out to 10 pages in length, and so to save at least a half a tree, we had it printed double-sided for everybody. John will get a little bit into some more detail as to some of the merits as to why we would like the process we're embarking on now to go through this section of code, that being the MPUD section of our code. But the reason why we're here today is because before we get too far down the road in working with a development team on the subject property, that property being commonly referred to as the Olson Block, we wanted to do a quick stopgap or a quick double check, if you will, or gut check with the Planning Commission to ensure that this is in fact the process that you too would concur with staff that we continue to march down the road on. The section of code under the MPUD section commonly provides for properties that are 20 acres in size to be appropriate for this section to be used. However, there is a subsection, again, John can specify that in a minute because it's kind of buried in the middle of the code language, that does allow through an application process for properties smaller in size to also be to also have this section of code be used for the project accordingly. And so within the agenda packet yourself, there is a letter from a developer that we're currently working with, and there are about a half a dozen or so different bullets that list the various benefits to the city as to why using this section of code would be appropriate. And we do concur. In fact, we worked with the developer in identifying these bullets. But what we would like to be able to get across this evening to the Planning Commission is that we, being the staff, firmly believe that for this subject property, should we have a unified plan brought to us, whether it's from the developer we're currently working with or another developer or a combination of people that are working to develop that site, because it's possible it could be a combination of any or all of the above, that the process stay true to what the process is, that being the Michigan planned, or excuse me, the mixed planned unit development process. I apologize for butchering the name. And there isn't any action before this commission or body tonight with respect to looking at preliminary site plans or sketch plans. All of that will come forward. Whether or not that's something that we're going to have in front of this body, a month from now or 6 months from now, we don't know until we actually have that submitted to us as saying, okay, here's what we're actually going to be looking at building. Right now the project has been talked about anything from 3 phases with 3 4-story buildings to 1 phase with 2 larger 4-story buildings versus 3 smaller 4-story buildings. So it's still kind of all over the board a little bit. And so that's why we're trying to work with them through this process and getting eventually something that this body will have to review. So John, why don't you, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to ask John to highlight a couple of the areas of the code that we're really here tonight for you to consider.
Thanks, Marcus. As Marcus said, we did create the MPUD district at the time, originally thinking of the Terry D project, but we weren't only thinking of the Terry D project. We knew there were other areas of town that it was conceivable that it might be in the city's best interest to look at mixed use and not a single use district like an office district or a retail district. And so we wrote the language for that district to allow us to consider other uses. And while we anticipated that the areas that might take advantage of this were of a larger nature, requiring the 20 acres, we also understood that there could potentially be some complicated, intensely developed smaller areas. And so there was purposely a waiver process written into the MPUD district, which you have in front of you. In section 46-644, under requirements, the first one, it talks about eligibility, and it talks about recognizable benefits, and it also talks about minimal area. And in there you'll see that the mention of the 20 contiguous acres of land. Then there also further down in subparagraph 2 under A, it gets into the ability to waive that requirement, but it requires the Planning Commission to make a recommendation to the City Council that the eligibility requirements are met and that the reasons submitted for waiving that size for the MPUD district are met And essentially, those items are mentioned in Mr. Munger's letter to the Planning Commission. And so that's essentially why we're here this evening, to whether it be Mr. Munger and other developers, we just want to make sure that the Planning Commission believes, as staff does, that it makes sense for the types of development we've been talking about for the Olson block to move forward on this site. And for your benefit, up on the screen is the area that we're essentially talking about. It's the area where the old Olson's grocery store was. It includes basically an entire block plus a little bit of area east of that block, back by, there's a small office building back there, but it extends all the way back. And essentially what we're saying is that if a developer or a group of developers comes forward and can submit a sketch plan showing singly or together that they have unified control over this area of land, that the Planning Commission would be on board with considering waiving the size requirement and allow that single developer or multiple developers to submit under the PUD process. And as you may recall from an earlier submittal, that's a two-step process requiring both a sketch plan submittal and then a final site plan submittal. And at both levels, it requires both the Planning Commission and the City Council to take action if we go through with the MPUD planning process. So there are plenty of opportunities to scrutinize the variety of concepts that may come forward under that MPUD process. And right now we're just trying to see that we can get off, to the first step so that we know that we have a green light to proceed with that process.
The one last thing to add is the property that you see highlighted in red, as John explained, is the subject property. The city didn't draw the line in the awkward shape, if you will, that you see it represented as. That line is drawn to represent the property as it's currently under control by the seller. And so, the property that's for sale includes all that you see within that area, including a portion of Shelby Street that was vacated to the property owner long before our time here. But that's part of the actual sale of the property. It includes all that you see within that area. So there's nothing special or magical, if you will, about how we're presenting it. We're just presenting it as the whole chunk of what we're talking about. And so through the informal dialogue that's been going on now for quite some time with the team of folks we've been working with that are interested in redeveloping that site, as you can see, there's a lot of area for them to sort of tinker with. And that's why we believe that this might be the best process for them to go through. So.
And with that, I'd sort of like to just walk through the benefits, because I think it's important, because that's the essence of why you would consider the waiver of the 20 acres, that there is going to be recognizable benefits that accrue to the city. The first one being that the redevelopment project would establish a new zero or near zero lot line block face along Mitchell Street. This development pattern will match development on the other side of the street and will increase building values on both sides of the street. The historical development pattern in downtowns, such as Cadillac, is for that zero lot line or near zero lot line, so that the visual interest in people walking to downtown to shop or use restaurants or other establishments have that visual interest very close to the sidewalk, and their interest is intrigued very close to the pedestrian network, and that's why that is important. This project will increase building density on the block of multiple uses, including much needed housing development. The city has seen a number of housing studies done, one more recently done by the Alliance for Economic Success, indicating a strong need for housing in this area, that we're deficient in a number of areas, senior rental units, general market rate rental units, and other areas. So it would be producing an element that has been demonstrated as needed for the community. The project will be designed in keeping with form-based principles of development. Form-based is something that became fairly popular probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and it speaks to this whole idea of the zero lot line development on the front setback, but it also speaks to possibly having greater building heights on the corners, that certain patterns in how you develop have the ability to increase the aesthetic value of development, but also add value and visual interest to the downtown corridor. The project will result in a significant increase in property values and tax base. As we all know, this area is within our Downtown Development Authority district. The DDA tax increment revenues have been a mainstay of supporting the development in the Cadillac Commons area. Right now, a majority of those increments are dedicated to producing the balance of the Cadillac Commons. But with new developments in the downtown, there's an ability to perhaps increase revenues so that at some point in time we could start to look at other projects or infrastructure projects in the downtown that might be made possible by the increased revenue. And when I say increased revenue, we might be looking at tax base in the multiple millions of dollars on this block. So it is significant. The scale and investment level of this project is large enough to attract grant funds from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Marcus and I have off and on been meeting with Dan Leonard. They're very interested because of the progress we've made through Cadillac Commons and other progress to continue to assist Cadillac in trying to make forward progress on our downtown. They understand that there's a need to provide gap financing in some situations, and they've looked at this, the planned concepts for this block, and within certain parameters from their side, believe that it meets with their criteria for contributing funds to the project. So that's an important piece in having the pro forma for the entire project come together. The project is also at a scale and level of investment that it can drive further private investment in downtown Cadillac. Much like our progress on Cadillac Commons generated more private investment, the introduction of moving from public sector capital to private sector capital being invested in our downtown is just another symbolic gesture that shows other investors that we've moved beyond the government sector, and now people in the private sector are putting up private money into our downtown. And I think that's a signal to them that things are moving in the direction such that it makes sense for other private investment. And to some degree, it's hard to know, chicken and egg sort of thing, but we see the Raven restaurant coming in. We see the things that Mr. Munger's doing, particularly with Cobb's Mitchell. And we're beginning to get additional inquiries regarding development sites, both in the downtown and near downtown area as a result of all this activity. And so that's another benefit that would accrue to the city. And one final element is that because of the density of this project, it's going to be anytime you do a downtown project, you're trying to squeeze as much as possible into a small area. And you're trying to do that, balancing the need for the amount of space you need to be leasable or sellable. and also meeting parking requirements. And many times, depending on the management plan of the development, they can do smart leasing, and they can lease to different entities where the parking can be shared in many instances, so that the parking demand can be spread throughout different times of the day or different times of the week. And so rather than try to provide the maximum parking under any scenario at any time of the day, you can run the project with a smaller parking footprint and still have it be successful in meeting the needs of that development. So those are all reasons why when you switch to the MPUD district, it creates that ability to work with them on their leasing plans, their studies, their parking requirements, and try to get the numbers set to where it'll be successful, but that we're not requiring excessive parking or things that add cost to the project that just really don't need to be there.
John's last bullet kind of triggered the other piece to this that I don't think either one of us mentioned, which is the fact that the city is well immersed in the State of Michigan Redevelopment Ready certification program, which is a certification program designed for municipalities, both large and small, to go through to essentially create a streamlined way of working with developers, so that should your community be fortunate enough to have a potential project, it doesn't get jammed up within sort of layers of bureaucracy. And it's funny as I say that, because this process in and of itself certainly has bureaucratic components to it, but it is, believe it or not, more streamlined than it would be if we had to come back in front of this body and or the city council every single time there was an add, move, or a change with respect to designing the project. And so by us going through this avenue, that also helps us in the eyes of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, the MEDC, who is the corporation that's running the state's Redevelopment Ready Community Certification Program, because this is an initiative in which that program encourages you to use when you can. So, that's
Yeah,
part of
and
it.
in actuality, in the near future, we're actually going to be required to submit 2 or 3 sites to MEDC, which they want us to focus our redevelopment efforts on. And since there's such strong interest at this time in this project, this would most likely be one of the leading candidates to be submitted to meet that redevelopment ready community criteria. So basically tonight, we would be looking for a motion of support to recommend to the City Council that they waive the 20-acre minimum for this particular project for one or more developers. It wouldn't be developer specific, but any combination of developers that could show a unified control for the site and a unified plan for the site. And if they could do that, then they would be, whatever people submitting that could do that would be considered to submit for the mixed plan unit development submittal.
Any questions for staff?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have one.
Go.
Well, maybe kind of two.
Oh.
When you were speaking earlier, Marcus, you talked about the fact that they own across Shelby Street there, and that had happened long before we were here.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, does that happen anywhere else in the city? And is there an opportunity within the movement of this property for the city to get that street back? And what would be the benefit of doing that or not doing that? And the second part of my question is that on the east side of that building, it looks like the building is built across the property line. Am I looking at that incorrectly?
Yes, it is.
Or is it just the end?
Yeah, it was years ago when Olson was.
Well, with respect to across the property line, these aerials have different angles of obliqueness in terms of not being always straight overhead. So sometimes it's pretty difficult when the amount of overage is excessive. It's probably clearly over the line, but there's times when you, without seeing a survey, you might not know down to the foot whether they're over the
I
line
think
or
what
right to
John's
the
trying
line.
to say is his graphic may not be 100% accurate.
Well, and I was taking that into consideration, except when you get a little further north there, it jigs to the right.
Well,
There,
yeah,
yeah,
this isn't a legal plat, so
okay.
it may not be. But back to the road. The road's a good question. So in my time frame here, the Weber Street comes to mind. So Weber Street, although it's still signed Weber Street, doesn't exist anymore. It was vacated by the city to the Don's Auto Clinic. It's right off of Mitchell Street.
Yep, I remember that one.
And that's no longer public, so they're responsible for it 100%. There may or may not be some form of utility-related easement. I'm not sure if one was put in place. One would have been put in place if there's any utilities that are there. So in this instance, assuming that the information that we have is accurate, as I'm explaining it to you, today, that in fact that portion of Shelby Street has been vacated and is owned by the property owners, they're under no obligation to sell it to the city. We don't really have any negotiation leverage with the sellers that own it. Perhaps with whomever buys the property, if there is a reason for us to want to get that street back, if it makes sense as a part of the future redevelopment of that whole lot, then perhaps we would try to negotiate that for some reason. But the more that's on the tax roll, the better, to be honest with you.
Right, but I look at that corner, and that corner is used a lot. It's not like the
Which
Weber
corner?
Street, on Shelby Street. Shelby Street is used a lot, headed towards, between the post office and back towards First Baptist.
Yeah.
And so, to me, it's not like the Weber Street that really doesn't get used that often. And so, that's why I asked the question, do we have the opportunity perhaps in this project to get that street back?
there's really two options. The street could function as a through street, either as a public street or a private street. As a private street, it could block certain movement, or it could essentially function as a public street, but be in private ownership. And so those would be the issues that we would look at as we move forward with the sketch plan. The concepts that we've had the chance to look at to date, for the most part, seem to look at that street as an important through movement. That's not to say that couldn't change in something that somebody would want to do, but at least at this point,
Keeps it open.
it looks like they see the merit in keeping that open.
Yeah, Joe.
The city obviously spent a lot of time on the MPUD formation in and of itself, and in particular, the 20 acres appears to be a specific choice. Was there a public policy reason for 20 acres versus 3 or 5 or 100?
To the best of my knowledge, I think some of the leading sites that were being looked at might have been like interchange areas and those parcels that tend to be located in those areas tended to be of a larger nature. And so I think that was the lead reason. And so much of downtown was already developed. We thought a lot of the development we might see downtown might be more like on the 1 or 2 lot kind of scale, and so I don't think we were thinking of it in this terms. And then when somebody came along and started amassing much more than 1 or 2 lots, we thought, well, it's probably good that we at least thought ahead to allow that waiver process, recognizing we might not have gotten it exactly right, or something that would come along that we didn't anticipate.
This is, for a community of our size and scale, this is unusual. To have a single property owner with this size in a downtown core coming online in this manner, it's unique. I mean, you might see a corner or a certain section or a parcel or two, but to have something this big come about, and then have somebody that's, trying to piece a deal together to build several, several story downtown mixed-use type buildings. I mean, this is really a great, unique position that we're finding ourselves in. One that we're probably going to be hard pressed to find ourselves in down the road. I'm aware of another area in the city where it's a single owner that owns about a block to a half a block, but not anything this big. But that John's recollection was pretty spot on. It was looked at for those other areas.
So we're going to have one developer, or we can possibly have 20 developers come in?
Well,
And
what
at
we
that point, do we get a site plan? Is there some kind of future, what are we going to put here and where is it going?
yes. So there could be right now there is no site plan, and so this is very preliminary today. The idea is to basically set the bar to say here's the process that we're going to take this chunk of property through. If we don't receive, as John was calling it, a unified development application, whether it is with a single developer or it could be a whole gaggle of them that have banded together to form a partnership, it doesn't really matter to us how
It's
they.
going to be one
form
entity
it.
we're going to deal with. We're not going to deal with 20 different entities.
That's-
Well, it'll be a group of entities choosing to submit under a unified plan.
So that's one.
There'll be one plan.
Okay,
Could be multiple entities, but one plan.
Okay.
So.
that's what my question was.
I mean, if this goes down a path where the property owner decides to cut and carve out all the different lots within the property, then all of this is for naught. And that could happen.
I got it. Anybody got anything else?
Is there a clock tower in there in this?
It is.
It is.
The on the corner of Cass.
In Mitchell,
Yeah,
yes.
Cass and Mitchell. It's on private property. There
Oh,
is,
is it? Okay.
yep, it is on private property. There is an easement in place that allows the city to have it there, but it is on private property. And should this project go, and should the zero lot line building get put in place, which we'd love to see, we've been talking internally about a perfect location to have that amenity relocated, and that could become a focal point to the new trailhead when the White Pine Trail extension occurs within the next year. So we're going to definitely need a place for people to get out of the sun at, off and on the trail, and that could really be a cool piece with the clock and a place for some wayfinding. Maybe we could even put a water fountain underneath it. I mean, there's all sorts of different options. So, and that project, just as an aside, the trailhead is at the corner of Cass and Lake Street.
Yeah.
So it'd be the southeast corner of Cass and Lake Street, just adjacent to the After 26 Cafe and the AMVETS facility. So.
So is staff looking for a motion of support to consider a waiver when a site plan as described comes before us?
Right, we're looking for the planning commission to recommend to the city council that they will consider, or will approve a waiver of the 20-acre size requirement if the developer or developers submit a unified plan for the entire parcel. And, of course, it would be dependent upon them doing so and following all the rules of the MPUD district in so submitting. So, but without that, then it's hard to even continue moving without then us crafting some other way to have the project considered. But since we already have a pathway that makes sense on the books, we just thought, let's move forward.
So a little bit more than what you had said. we're looking essentially for the motion of support tonight, that the MPUD process would be the process for this site once we have a unified plan submitted to us. Now, as John mentioned, that plan is subject to everything. I mean, it's not as if we're accepting something sight unseen. There's nothing here for us to review or even get into. I mean, when that happens, there'll be presentations from the development team and staff presentations and whatnot.
And that motion would include recommendation for the city council to do the same.
I'm sorry for so many questions. Would it still be subject to planning commission
Oh, yeah.
approval? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
It has to have planning commission
now-
approval first.
We're just getting the verbiage in place for
the
that.
waiver.
Then it comes back.
The waiver to accept the 20 acres instead of this,
Or 3 as opposed to 20?
Yes.
So it's not really granting
Yeah.
a waiver, it's
This,
telling
It's
them
to
that we
accept
will
a
if they
smaller
do this,
area.
We will,
It's a smaller area, right?
we will entertain.
Right, it allows it to come to the table. Of course, you have all the options open to you in
Well-
terms of what you approve or not approve under
That's
the
later on.
MPUD process.
All we're doing is allowing them to go to a smaller spot versus 20 acres.
It also gives a sense of comfort, like a security blanket, to lack of a better way of defining it, to staff when we're working with the developers and we're talking about, and they say, hey, you know, can you give us a ballpark as far as what this process is going to involve and how much time it's going to take? You know, up until presumably that this gets approved tonight, up until this point, you know, we've been couching it by saying simply, well, we would like to take it through the MPUD process, and if we do, you know, there's going to be a couple of stops with the planning commission, followed by, you know, a stop or two at the city council before it gets done, and all of that could take, you know, on the short end, probably 60 days, but likely somewhere around 90 days if it's an aggressive timetable, you know, from beginning to end. This way, we're able to basically say, okay, yes, you know, this is going to be the process we're taking you through versus saying, well, you know, it may be, but it may not be, and if it isn't, then your window could be a lot longer. So it helps us be more responsive and proactive in working with the project.
I also hear you saying that this particular size of a plot in a downtown area is unusual.
Yeah, it is for us, certainly.
To have control of the whole block.
Yeah.
I would so move, Mr. Chair.
And we also, as they haven't brought up, we can put a time frame on that.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Okay, so, if no other questions, and we want to.
Let's discuss that. Is there anybody that wants to put a time frame on this?
Why would we
Year
do
Why
that?
would we do that?
Why would we do that?
I
It
would.
was
Yeah,
brought up, I'm
right.
asking the question.
Yeah.
I'd throw a year at it.
Well, I'm asking you a question. Why would we do that?
I wouldn't,
Yeah.
but,
Because if nothing happens in a year, it's off the table.
well, that actually puts a little pressure on the people who are doing it too. So I guess that's up to the group.
A project of this magnitude, though, could drag on for a long time in the process.
We don't want to deter
planning
them.
process. To throw an
That's a good question.
impediment in their
Very
way
good
would
question.
seem unreasonable. I mean,
And we're talking about moving it down to 3 acres anyway, as opposed to any size, correct? I mean, so
Well, that,
depending upon whatever
It's just a-
time it is,
It's a waiver.
I would think we'd
Yeah.
want it to be waived.
that means you can go down to an acre. You can go down a half acre. We're opening Pandora's box.
Just, if I may, just to clarify, we're only talking about the lot that we presented the
Correct.
commission on
The
tonight.
applicant.
Right.
So, yeah,
So
so,
nobody, any other location would also have to come here.
And do the same thing you do.
Yeah,
Right,
yes.
right. If somebody wanted
They would
to
have to,
go even smaller, we would be back here again.
or a
larger.
different, or a different area.
they would have to
Anything
file the
under 20.
application.
Yeah, yeah, we're not asking for carte blanche
Right.
authority to
Waiver for
usurp
this
the
project.
code, yeah, just this.
Right.
Did we just talk about the time frame? I'm not interested in a time frame, but I don't.
Yeah, I don't think we are.
I'm not, I
That's
mean,
fine.
Mm.
I don't know how
Just
big
bringing
this
it
is gonna
up.
be, but it was a good question. Because it forces something to be done within a time frame. So.
But to David's point, with the size of this project, it could drag out over a year, so we don't want to, you know, force somebody's hand who couldn't possibly
This
finish
is
something.
Cadillac,
Yeah.
and things take a little longer.
Right, right.
They could. They could.
That's fine.
So just to make sure we're all on the same scorecard here, we have a motion on the, motion on the table to support, motion on the table as to what Mr. Wallace had said, and that was supported, or are we still waiting?
No,
for
it's
Not
support.
yet. Not yet.
We haven't-
Okay.
Actually.
Support.
Let's
Now
read
we,
back
now we
the,
do, so.
Who supported?
Joe brought it to the table first, and I don't know his last name yet, so I called him.
Oh.
It's just fine.
And,
I'll answer to it.
And Mr. Gregg then seconded it, supported it. Now
can we hear the language again that we
There,
are
yes.
agreeing to?
Fit everything out of what?
Now that we just kind of gave you carte blanche, what did we just sign?
Go ahead, you said it about 3 times.
Try to get it.
Yeah.
That the Planning Commission recommends to the city council that they waive the 20-acre requirement to take advantage of the MPUD district for the site as submitted with, under the provision that the developer or developers who submit with unified control of the property and have the ability to submit one unified plan through the MPUD process.
And this is all being recorded, and so.
I was gonna ask you who was writing that down.
We've got it.
Judge
We've got
got
it,
it.
so.
That's a fair representation
So-
of my motion.
You got that? Are you good with it still?
Sure.
Any more discussion, or are we ready for roll call?
Everybody okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Bauman,
Yes.
Filkins,
Yes.
Bunce,
Yes.
Gregg,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Fent,
Yep.
Putvin.
Yes. Perfect.
Now, the big question is, what's gonna happen to G&D?
Well,
Yeah, you know, actually,
Well, there.
something that was brought up, my kids, the first thing that comes out of his mind was.
yeah.
Could
we ensure that G&D
That could be the
gets
first
placed in
building we
appropriate
built down
place
there.
The pizza ovens are going nowhere.
Okay, old business, we have nothing.
Last century and this century.
Any board member comments? Welcome to our new members, of course.
Yeah, the question, we voted on Piranha Hose and,
Yep.
and that street last time. Did
Yep.
that go through city council?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay,
everything's all
Yes.
set.
so everything's ready to go? Good.
It went through, it was approved, the purchase agreement was approved, and both parties have executed,
They
and now they're
signed it.
doing their due diligence.
Cool.
Yep.
Perfect. Good.
A lot of times we don't hear back. what happens.
Any other board member comments? Any other communications staff?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have no public, so we'll get no comments. Any other business, gentlemen? No one? Marcus, we're a little over 4 minutes, but we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We do have another meeting this month, everyone.